The most dangerous thing a man can do is let a woman underestimate him. I did it on purpose. My name is Walter Grady, and on a Tuesday morning in October, my wife slid a folder across the breakfast table like she was closing a business deal, because to her, that's exactly what it was. I was 63 years old, sitting in my kitchen in Charleston, South Carolina, drinking coffee I'd made too strong on purpose, because at my age you earn the right to drink it however you please. Corinne was already in her gray suit, the one she wore when she wanted a room to know who was in charge before she said a word. She was 48, 12 years younger than me, and she ran a private wealth management firm downtown with her name on the door in brushed steel letters. She set the folder down without looking up from her phone. "My attorneys drew this up," she said. "I should have asked for it before the wedding, honestly. I've built too much to leave it exposed." I looked at the folder. Embossed letterhead, corners too sharp, like it had never been touched by human hands until mine. "What is this?" I said, though some old, watchful part of me already knew exactly what it was. "A postnuptial agreement," she said, the way another woman might say the mail had come. Flat. Routine. "We've been married 3 years, Corinne, which is exactly why we need this settled now." She finally looked up, and she smiled at me. The smile she used on junior associates right before she fired them. "Take your time reading it. Marcus is available if you have questions." She grabbed her bag and walked out without kissing me goodbye, which she hadn't done in months, not that I was counting, though of course I was. The door clicked shut behind her, and the folder sat there next to my coffee mug like it was waiting to see what I'd do. I picked it up. 14 pages. Her signature already sitting on page 11, patient and confident, like she already knew how this story ended. Somewhere around page 7, where my assets were listed as modest, non-liquid, and largely retirement-based, something in my chest went very still. Not anger. Clarity. But this story doesn't start on that Tuesday morning in October. It starts 4 years earlier, on a rainy Thursday night in March, at a charity gala for the Charleston Historical Preservation Society, the kind of event where everybody's either raising money or raising their own profile and calling it the same thing. I was standing by the bar because that's where the honest people stand, nursing a club soda, wondering why my old Navy buddy Harold Boone had talked me into a tuxedo I hadn't worn since my daughter's wedding. "You haven't left that house since Eleanor passed," Harold had told me 2 days before. "You're turning into one of those old men who talks to his tomato plants." "I don't have tomato plants, Harold." "Exactly," he said. "That's the problem." So I went. Widower. 59 years old at the time. 3 years gone since I'd lost my wife of 31 years to a stroke that gave us no warning and no mercy. I figured I'd shake a few hands, write a check, and be home in time to fall asleep in my recliner like always. Corinne found me. I understand that now, but that rainy Thursday in March, I just thought I'd gotten lucky in a way I hadn't expected to feel lucky again. "You're not working the room," she said, appearing at my elbow like she'd been standing there the whole evening. "Neither are you," I said. She laughed, and it sounded real, not the practiced kind you hear at those things. "Touché. Corinne Ashford. And you are?" "Walter Grady. Retired, mostly. I putter. Most people move on after I putter." She didn't. We talked for 2 hours that night, out on the veranda, while the rain came down soft over the harbor. She told me she'd built her wealth management firm from nothing after her divorce, that she was proud of every dollar she'd ever earned because nobody had ever handed her anything, and there was something in the way she said it, something sharp underneath the charm, that I should have paid closer attention to. I've built plenty of things myself. I recognize a person who's still fighting a war nobody else can see. Here's what Corinne believed she knew about Walter Grady that rainy March night. Retired something or other. Comfortable little house. Modest car. A widower with a pension and a garden he didn't actually have. Here's what was true. 34 years earlier, I'd started a marine engineering firm out of a rented garage in North Charleston with 2 employees and a bank loan my own father co-signed against his better judgment. By the time I sold it, we held patents on hull stabilization systems used on cargo vessels up and down the eastern seaboard, and the private equity group that bought us out wrote a number on a check that made my accountant, a good Presbyterian man, say a word I'd never heard him say before. I didn't do interviews. I didn't sponsor a wing of any hospital with my name on a plaque. Eleanor and I took the check, paid off the house, put money away for our grandkids' education, and went to Kiowa Island for 2 weeks, where I mostly just watched pelicans dive for fish and felt, for the first time in a decade, like I could breathe. Money that announces itself invites trouble. I'd watched enough men my age lose themselves chasing a reputation to know that the quiet man in the corner is usually the one who actually has something worth protecting. Corinne thought she was dating a modest retired engineer, living off Social Security and a small pension. She was dating a man who held a controlling interest in a maritime logistics holding company, owned 2 commercial properties in downtown Charleston free and clear, and hadn't told a living soul his actual net worth since the day Eleanor died, because there was nobody left who needed to know. We dated for 16 months. She brought me to her firm's client dinners and introduced me as her sweet, low-key gentleman friend, like I was a nice accessory she'd picked up at an estate sale. I wore that role comfortably. Cardigan sweaters, an old watch my father gave me, nothing that drew a second glance. Harold pulled me aside at one of those dinners, about 2 months before the wedding, third bourbon deep, that look on his face he gets. She introduces you like a hobby, Walt. You notice that? She's proud of me, Harold. He set his glass down slow. She talks about her quarterly numbers with more warmth than she talks about you. I laughed it off that night. I shouldn't have. We married on a Saturday in June. Small ceremony at a plantation-style venue outside town. Her idea, intimate, she called it. Efficient, I thought, but I kept that to myself. 19 guests. The Spanish moss hanging still in that thick low-country heat that never quite lets you forget it's there. Her investors sent an enormous arrangement of white orchids to the reception, which struck me as odd at the time. I remember thinking, why would a woman's business investors send wedding flowers to a private ceremony? I filed that thought away, the way I file everything, in the back of my mind where things sit until they're needed. The first year was good. I want to say that honestly, because I mean it. Then came month 14. A Sunday evening in late August, Corinne was at her downtown office again, working what she called a light Sunday, which by then meant 6 hours minimum. I was home at the kitchen table going through our shared financial cloud drive, looking for the flood insurance renewal on the beach house, because that's what a man my age does on a slow Sunday. And I took a wrong turn into a folder labeled Contingency, and there it was. A document titled Grady Exit Framework. My first thought, God help me, was that it was a very tidy font for something about to ruin the rest of my afternoon. I opened it. I read it twice. Then I sat still for a solid 5 minutes, which, if you know me, is about 4 minutes and 50 seconds longer than I typically sit still for anything. 15 pages. Methodical. Clinical. Our marriage laid out like a quarterly business plan. My financial profile, or what she believed was my financial profile, listed under a column labeled Immaterial. A timeline broken into phases. Phase 2. Consolidate shared accounts under her name for liability purposes. Phase 3. Expand her public equity position ahead of a firm merger. Phase 5. Initiate separation once her merger closes and community property exposure is minimized. And, on page 9, a name. Preston Wickes, senior partner at her firm, smooth-talking man who'd shaken my hand at every single client dinner and always called me Champ, Champ. I closed the laptop. I went to the kitchen and made a pot of she-crab soup from scratch, because some evenings call for the kind of focus that only comes from standing at a stove stirring something slowly. I opened a bottle of red, set 2 places at the table, and sitting there in that quiet kitchen, I understood something almost worse than the betrayal itself. She hadn't married me despite my being unremarkable. She'd married me because of it. Think about it. No public profile, no industry panels, no ego that required feeding. A widower who'd sold a company for an enormous sum that nobody outside one accountant's office ever heard about, and who spent his retirement watching pelicans instead of building a legacy brand. I was, in her careful estimation, the perfect quiet asset to have on her arm while she navigated a merger that her board was watching closely for any sign of instability in her personal life. A steady older husband made her look grounded, made a nervous board of directors exhale. I wasn't a partner. I was a stabilizing prop with a wedding band. And the most dangerous part of it all was that she was right about everything she believed she knew. I was quiet. I was unremarkable by design. I was exactly what she'd researched. She simply never stopped to consider what a quiet man does once he understands he's been underestimated. She came home that evening around 8:30. "Something smells wonderful," she said, setting her bag down by the door. "She crab soup," I said. "Sit down and eat." She sat. We ate. She told me about her day. I told her about mine, the edited version. We had wine. I did the dishes. We went to bed, and while she slept beside me, I lay there staring at the ceiling fan turning slow circles in the dark, and I made a decision that would take the better part of 2 years to carry out. No confrontation, no scene, no dramatic exit. Because here's the truth about a long con, something I learned decades before I ever met Corinne Ashford. The only way to beat one is to run a longer one. Which brings us back to that Tuesday morning in October. The folder, the 14 pages, my assets listed as modest and non-liquid. I nearly laughed out loud at that word, modest. I finished my coffee, picked up my phone, and called the one man I should have called the previous August. Elias Marsh, my attorney, a friend going back to the first year I opened that garage in North Charleston. Sharper than he looks, which is saying something, because the man looks like he argues with umpires at his grandson's Little League games. He picked up on the second ring. "Elias," I said, "I need you in Charleston by Friday." "That bad?" I looked out the kitchen window at the live oak in the backyard, the one Eleanor planted the year our first daughter was born. "No," I said. "It's about to get that good. If you've been with us a while, do me one favor, would you? Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet, because it costs you nothing, and it means the world to an old man telling his story. Now, let me tell you something about patience. Something nobody under 50 ever seems to understand. They think patience is passive, weak, even. They're wrong. Patience is the most aggressive weapon a man can carry. It's waking up every single morning knowing exactly what's coming and choosing to smile anyway, choosing to pour the wine, choosing to ask about her merger and mean it, sounding like you mean it, while a 15-page document titled Grady Exit Framework sits 3 feet away in a folder labeled Contingency. That's not weakness, son. That's war. Fought so quietly the other side doesn't even know the shooting started. Elias flew in that Friday looking like he'd slept sitting up on the plane, because he had. He walked into my little office downtown, the one paid for through a management company Corinne had never heard of, carrying a legal pad and a gas station coffee, and the expression of a man who already suspected this was going to be interesting. "Talk," he said. So I did. All of it. The gala in March. The 16 months of courtship. The wedding under the oaks. The document I'd found in August. Preston Wickes's name on page 9. The 5-phase timeline. The Postnup landing on my kitchen table like a grenade dressed up in legal letterhead. Alias didn't interrupt once, which is rare for a man who interrupts judges for a living. When I finished, he set his coffee down, leaned back, and stared at the ceiling a long while. "She wrote all this down," he said quietly. 15 pages, Elias. He looked at me straight on. "That's either remarkably arrogant or remarkably foolish." "Both," I said. "And we're going to use both." I slid a single sheet across the desk. He read it. His eyebrows climbed slow, the way they do when a man who's genuinely seen it all sees something brand new. "You've been sitting on this since August," he said. "I've had time to think it through. This is going to take real time to build, Walter." She handed me the timeline herself. I said, "Phase 5 isn't for 2 years yet. We've got runway." He looked at that paper one more time, and then he did something I hadn't seen him do in 20 years of friendship. He smiled. "All right," he said. "Let's build something." We got to work that Monday. First thing, a new holding company, registered quietly in Delaware over a weekend. We called it Live Oak Ventures, a name so boring it could put an auditor to sleep in under a minute, which was exactly the point. Boring names hide interesting things. I learned that building my first company 30-some years back. The first move through Live Oak was the one that mattered most. An 11% position in Ashford Wealth Partners itself, her firm, her legacy, the things she talked about over breakfast, at dinner, half asleep at midnight. I bought in silently, through Live Oak, through a secondary entity that connected to it the way a shadow connects to a man standing in the sun, only visible if you already know where the light's coming from. She never thought to look for the light. Elias spread the purchase across 3 separate tranches over 4 months, so no single transaction tripped a disclosure requirement. Clean, invisible. About 10 weeks after she'd handed me that Postnup, I quietly owned a piece of the very firm she was so determined to protect from me. She made me dinner that same week and told me I was her rock. I told her she kept surprising me. She had no idea how right I was. Here's the part people never quite understand when I tell this story. They expect me to say I went cold, checked out, stopped caring. I didn't. I remembered her birthday. I walked with her along the Battery on Sunday mornings the way we always had. I asked about her merger with what looked and felt like genuine interest, because some small part of it still was genuine, which made it harder, not easier. The moment she sensed even a flicker of change in me, the whole plan would have unraveled, because Corinne could read a room the way most folks read a stop sign, instantly, without thinking. So I gave her nothing to read. I smiled. I poured the wine. And every other Saturday morning, I drove downtown and quietly dismantled the foundation she thought she'd built around me. Revenge doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it looks exactly like a good marriage. But I want to be honest with you, because this isn't only a story about strategy. There were nights, and I won't tell you how many, when I sat alone at that kitchen table after she'd gone to bed and felt something I didn't have a clean name for. Not anger, not even sadness. Exactly. Something closer to grief. There was one night in particular, a cold snap in January, rain against the windows, Corinne asleep upstairs, and I sat in the dark with a glass of bourbon I never touched, and it hit me all at once. The full weight of it. Not the betrayal. Just the plain, foolish fact that I had walked onto that veranda in the rain 4 years earlier and thought I'd been given something good a second time in my life. I had wanted it to be real, even after I read that document. Some stubborn, hopeful part of an old man had wanted it to be real anyway. I sat with that a long 10 minutes. Then I poured the bourbon down the drain, rinsed the glass, and went up to bed. And the next morning I drove downtown and kept building, because wanting something to be different than it is, and letting that want destroy you, are 2 entirely different choices. I made mine. By that spring, I moved into the next phase. Corinne talked constantly over dinner about her firm's back-office vendor troubles, the Atlanta processing partner missing compliance deadlines, the Savannah data firm bleeding her margins. On and on. I nodded. I sympathized. I refilled her glass. I was also taking notes. 2 of her firm's key vendor partners were quietly shopping for capital to stay afloat. I bought into both, not controlling stakes, nothing loud, just enough presence at the table that when her team sat down to renegotiate contracts, the people across from them answered, through several invisible layers, to me. She was negotiating against men who reported to her own husband, and she never knew it. I won't pretend that didn't feel a little satisfying. I'm only human, even at 63. That fall, Elias called on a Thursday with no greeting at all. "Preston Wickes," he said. I set my coffee down. "Talk to me." "Runs a small side investment fund. 6 limited partners. He's been quietly hunting for someone to anchor a second capital raise." "Quietly," I said, my favorite word in the English language. "How much?" "1.8 million to anchor it. He'd take less from the right partner." "Become the right partner," I said. "Arm's length. 4 layers minimum. He cannot know it's me." "He calls you champ, Walter." "He's called me champ to my face 6 times, I said. "I want 5 layers." Elias actually laughed, first time in months. 5 layers. Understood. By that January, here's what the board looked like, though only 2 men on earth knew it. Live Oak Ventures holding 11% of Ashford Wealth Partners, both struggling vendor firms, carrying my capital. Preston Wickes' own fund, anchored 5 layers deep by a man he called champ at every single dinner. And Corinne was closing in on her best year yet. Her merger was on track. Her board was pleased. Her investors were patient. She had absolutely no idea the ground beneath everything she'd built belonged to somebody else. She was standing on my floors and calling the house hers. A Tuesday in October, exactly 1 year to the day since she'd set that folder beside my coffee mug. "Everything's in position," Elias said when he called that morning. You want the response letter drafted? Not a response, I said. A revelation. How thorough do you want it? I want her attorney to stand up from his chair and shut his own office door, I said. Give me 3 weeks. You've got 2. 2 weeks later, Elias walked into my office, carrying 51 pages, set them down on the desk like a man handling something that might still go off. I read every page slow. This is everything, I said. Everything, he said. 13 holdings across the maritime and logistics sector, 3 commercial properties, the 11% position in her own firm, both vendor stakes, the Wickes Fund, all 5 layers fully traceable straight back to you. I looked at that stack, 51 pages. Her Postnup had run 14. She'd brought a filing cabinet. I came back with the whole courthouse. Send it, I said. The call came a few days later, not from Corinne, but from her attorney, a man named Foster Deal, senior partner, 26 years in family law, a man who by reputation had seen absolutely everything a divorce could throw at him. Elias told me, the call lasted 7 minutes, that Deal spoke the way a man speaks when he's walking across ice he suspects won't hold. Mr. Marsh, he said carefully, your client's holdings appear considerably more substantial than we understood. Yes, Elias said, they are. Mrs. Grady would like to revisit the terms of the postnuptial agreement. Elias looked across the desk at me. I shook my head. Once. The terms are hers, Elias told him. Mr. Grady wouldn't change a single word. A long silence. I see, Deal finally said. I'll be in touch. There's a moment in every long game where the whole board tilts, quiet, no explosion, no speech, just a slow, irreversible shift, like a ship that's already decided to go under but hasn't told the passengers yet. That moment arrived a few days after Foster Deal's phone call. I wasn't there when he called Corinne, but Elias has a friend at that firm, and that friend said the senior partner shut his office door and didn't come back out for the better part of an hour. An hour. I've sat across enough negotiating tables in my life to know what an hour behind a closed door means. It means the numbers don't add up the way somebody thought they did. It means somebody just made a very expensive mistake. Corinne came home early that Wednesday afternoon. That alone told me everything, because Corinne never came home early. She treated that office like her true residence and our house like a hotel she happened to have complicated feelings about. But there she was, mid-afternoon, sitting at our kitchen table when I came in from my morning walk. No blazer, no laptop open. Just sitting very still. I knew immediately. I didn't let my face know it. Hey there, I said, setting my keys on the counter. You're home early. She looked at me a long moment, really looked, the way she had that first rainy night on the veranda, like I was a puzzle she hadn't finished solving. Foster called me, she said. Your attorney. He did, I said. I opened the fridge, took my time pulling out the pitcher of sweet tea. Everything all right? Walter. Corinne. She let out a slow breath, the kind people release when they've been holding something heavy for hours and the body just finally sets it down. Live Oak, she said. I turned around, leaned against the counter, and looked at her. What about it? You know exactly what about it. Silence sat in that kitchen a long while. Outside, Charleston went on doing what it does, a mockingbird somewhere in the live oak, a car easing down our quiet street, the whole ordinary world moving along like nothing at all had happened. How long? She asked. Her voice stayed level. I'll give her that. Even then, Corinne didn't crack easy. How long what? Since when? Walter. I crossed my arms and looked at the woman I'd shared a bed with for 3 years. The woman who'd filed our marriage away in a folder labeled contingency. Since last August, I said. She closed her eyes. Just a second. Just long enough for me to watch the math happening behind them. The document, she said quietly. The document, I said. Another silence. Longer this time. You never said a word, she said. Neither did you. She rose slowly, walked to the window, stood there with her back to me, looking down at our quiet street. I let her stand there. I hadn't been in any hurry for 14 months. How much? She said finally, without turning around. How much what? How much do you actually have, Walter? It wasn't really a question at all. It was the sound of a woman doing arithmetic and hating the answer she kept landing on. More than your attorneys understood, I said. She turned around, and I saw something in her I hadn't expected. Not fury, not calculation. Something stripped bare and raw. For just a moment she looked like a person instead of a strategy. "What do you want, Walter?" she said, quieter now. "What do you actually want?" I looked at her a long moment. I thought about the honest answer, not the legal one. What had I wanted? I'd wanted a real marriage. I'd wanted the woman from that rainy veranda who laughed before I even finished the joke, who showed up, who asked questions because she actually wanted the answers. But that woman had been a performance, and you cannot want back something that was never really there to begin with. "Nothing you haven't already offered me," I said. "The Postnup stands. Every word of it is yours." She stared at me, waiting for the trap. "You hold 11% of my firm." "I do. And the vendors?" "Also me. And Preston's fund, 5 layers down. But yes." She shook her head slowly, not in anger, in something closer to disbelief. "You built all of that," she said, "while living in this house, while having dinner with me every night, while walking the Battery with me on Sunday mornings like everything was fine. You were planning phase 5, I said. "I was planning the whole rest of the board." She stood quiet a long while. When she finally spoke again, her voice had returned to something composed. The Corinne I knew, the one in charge of every room she entered. But her eyes had changed. "I underestimated you," she said. I held her gaze. "Yes," I said. "You did." She nodded once, picked up her bag, and walked out of the kitchen. I heard the front door close behind her. I stood at that window a good while, looking out at the same street she'd just been looking at. It didn't feel like winning exactly. It felt like something ending that should have ended a different way from the very start. The dissolution proceedings began the following week. Elias and Foster Deal sat across from each other in a conference room on the 11th floor of a building 3 blocks from my own quiet office, which I found privately satisfying. The Postnup Corinne had protected everything she'd openly declared, her real estate, her personal accounts, her stated equity in the firm. It said nothing at all about Live Oak Ventures, nothing about the vendor stakes, nothing about Preston Wickes's fund. Because she'd written that agreement in a world where Walter Grady was a comfortable retired widower with a small pension and nothing worth protecting against. She'd protected herself from the man she believed she'd married. She had no protection at all from the man she actually had. Elias told me Foster Deal sat at that table looking like a man solving a puzzle where somebody had quietly swapped out half the pieces overnight. "Your Postnup is airtight," Elias told him, pleasant as Sunday morning. "Every asset your client listed is fully protected." "And his assets?" "Not listed," Elias said. "Therefore not subject to the agreement. She'll contest it." "On what grounds?" Elias said. "She wrote it herself." Deal had no answer for that. Neither did Corinne. The papers were signed on a Tuesday morning in late spring. I moved out of the house that week, hired 2 men, took only what belonged to me, left everything of hers exactly where she'd placed it, clean, efficient. She'd have appreciated the efficiency, I think, if it hadn't been happening to her. I took a place on Sullivan's Island, 2nd floor, a porch that looked straight out at the water, and I stood out there the first night with a glass of red wine and something I hadn't felt in almost 2 years. Still, not happy, not triumphant, just still. Like a room after a long noise finally stops, and you realize just how loud it had actually been the whole time. That summer, Ashford Wealth Partners called an emergency board session. Live Oak's 11% stake, now public through the dissolution filing, sent a real shiver through her investor base. The institutional backer who'd been so patient for 2 years, the same one who'd sent those white orchids to our wedding, suddenly requested a formal sit-down. I finally understood why investors send wedding flowers. They were never celebrating a marriage. They were protecting an investment. Questions Corinne couldn't answer cleanly. A board running thin on patience. Preston Wickes resigned from her firm a few weeks later. The official word was personal ventures. The actual reason was that his little side fund, anchored 5 layers deep by a man he'd called champ at every dinner for years, had become a conversation he couldn't finish without unraveling. I never made a single phone call to make any of that happen. I never had to. By late summer, her board reached out to Elias, not with hostility, almost sheepishly. They wanted stability. Live Oak's position commanded real respect at that table. Would Mr. Grady consider a formal seat? Elias forwarded the request without comment. I read it twice. Thought about a rainy Thursday night in March, 4 years back, a woman appearing at my elbow like she'd been standing there the whole evening, a smile with terms and conditions I'd never actually agreed to. "You're not working the room," she'd said. I wasn't. But I was paying close attention to every single person in it. I called Elias. "Tell them I'll take the chairmanship," I said. "Not an advisory seat. The chairmanship. Somebody who actually understands what was built there." "You know she'll see that announcement," Elias said. "I know." I looked out at the water from my porch on Sullivan's Island, the tide easing out slow the way it does most evenings, indifferent to every single one of our problems. "And nothing," I said. "It's just business now." On a Sunday morning that September, I read about the chairmanship announcement in the business section over coffee at a little place near the pier. Good coffee. Nobody there had the faintest idea who I was, which remains my favorite part of this whole story. Harold called around 10. "Saw the announcement," he said. "Morning, Harold." "Walt." A pause. "I told you something was off about her back at that dinner." "You did," I said. "You were right. So what now?" I set my cup down slow. "Now," I said. "Now I finish my coffee." "That's it, Walt? That's the whole ending?" I thought about the January night with the bourbon I never drank, the ceiling fan turning slow circles in the dark, the she-crab soup I made for two on a Sunday evening while a 15-page document sat 3 feet away on the counter. I thought about what I'd wanted, and what I'd actually gotten, and how sometimes those two things, even when they're nothing alike, still manage to add up to something an old man can live with. "Yeah," I said. "I'm okay. And the strange thing is, I meant every word of it.